What's up, summoners? King Blair here. Gearing in Epic 7 can be one of the most frustrating parts and most difficult parts of playing the game that drives a lot of players away, but after you play for a while, you'll start catching a lot of stuff and get a lot better at gearing, and it almost becomes second nature to a point where I don't even have to think about too much of whether or not a piece is good. I'll just kind of know, right, from seeing it right away. So today, what we're going to be doing is the ultimate gearing guide for early, for mid, for late game players, everything you need to know about gear in Epic 7. Because we're going to be covering so much stuff, there is going to be timestamps for you to skip around. So if you're an early game player, you should honestly watch most of the video. If you're mid game to late game, you can skip around to the later parts of the video. That may help you with better tips. But again, we're going to be covering everything you need to know about gear. So you know what to expect from the video. We will first start with the bare basics, talking about the grade of the gear, the level of the gear. So like blue pieces, no color pieces, purple pieces, red pieces. We'll also be talking about substats, low rolls, high rolls. What does that mean? How to determine if you have a good starting piece. I will also be talking about reforging, what it does, why it makes level 85 gear so good, and we'll also be talking about Substat Change, which is more of a newer topic on how to change some substats on your pieces once they reach level 15, right? So we're going to talk about all of that. I'll give you tips on how to find different materials. So that'll be really cool. And then for the mid game to late game side, we're going to be talking about how to evaluate your gear. How can you tell if a piece is good, right? How do you know, is this piece a good piece, or is it something that you should just essentially throw away, right? We'll talk about how you can determine that, how you can make that decision for yourself. And we will also be talking about how to approach gearing your units, because that's also one of the parts that is very intimidating, and a lot of people think that you need the best gear in the world to build certain heroes, but honestly the functional approach is going to be best, and we'll talk about all that. So make sure to click on the timestamps. If you do like the video and found it helpful, make sure you like and subscribe, because it really does help out the video, and leave a comment because it also does motivate me to make more guides like this. But the subscribe button for sure. I will definitely be getting more guides to you guys out in the future, more in-depth guides to hopefully help you guys enjoy the game as much as I do. But without further ado, let's first start with some generic stuff that I do want to say before I go into the basics, and that is going to be speed is not everything in this game. That's the biggest fallacy that you need to get out of your mind, that speed is everything. That is simply not the case. Some of my best pieces do not have a single speed substat on them, and that is one of the biggest fallacies that early, mid, and late game players will have. And you are not going to be progressing as much as if everything you're looking for is just going to be speed, because then you'll feel like every piece of gear is trash, right? So there are things you have to evaluate, such as the set, the substats, and all that good stuff. So just know, as an early game player, not everything's about speed. There are other units that use other stats, and you don't necessarily have to have 2 million speed to be competitive at this game and to have fun in this game. As a disclaimer, I want to get out of the way, because it's one of those fallacies that can really hurt you and how you approach gearing, and I want to get that out of the way right away. But with that, let's get right into it, starting with the basics, and we're going to be transitioning to that section. Now let's start with the bare foundations, which is going to be grade and level. We'll also be talking here when you should start moving up the levels of gear, and when it's okay to have some lower level gear, particularly as quote-unquote hand-me-downs, because yes, just like in real life, there are hand-me-downs. Once your unit outgrows their gear, when you get better replacement for their gear, that gear will most likely go to another unit that you're working on, or a PvE unit that you don't need to have the best gear for, right? So with that, let's first start with the grade, and then we'll talk about the level, and then we'll talk about how to outgrow the gear once it gets level and when you progress your account. So first, the grade of the gear. And there's 4 different gears. There's the no color gear, which is the common. That's basically fodder gear. You can't actually use this to enhance your gear, which is actually really nice, because you do get it a lot from adventure, and you can just use it to enhance your gear. It's not the best, not the same as charms, but it does get the job done. Then you have blue gear, where you start getting some gear that you can actually use on some of your heroes. So for example, this piece I've actually kept. Blue gear starts with 2 substats that when you get to +3, +6, it will add or increase those substats by a certain roll value that is random. We'll talk about that in a different section for the roll value assessment of it, but you'll get a certain roll value when you get to 3 or 6. At 9 and 12, you will get a new substat that will show up here that is going to be random. You have no choice on what you get. And at 15, one of those 4 stats will get boosted. Now, blue gear is commonly known as beginner gear. What's really nice about blue gear is that you have a very high chance of it rolling into your desired stat. Now, the level of the grade of your gear does not affect the roll value. what affects the roll value is going to be the level. So blue gear level 85 is still pretty good, right? It's still going to be better in terms of roll value than a level 50 piece, right? But we'll talk about levels in a second. But as far as the grade, for the blue grade, it is called early game gear because it's something that you start off that you can get some desired substats. Like for example, if I was to use this in a DPS or my arbitrary Wildred, I could get some speed and I could get some attack, right? And I can guarantee those substats, which is very nice for early game players. The later you get on and you get more competitive in PvP, blue gear starts to lose value because, as we'll see with purple gear, you don't start with the same number of stats, right? For purple gear, you actually start with 3 substats over 2, and at 3, 6, or 9, you increase one of the substats. At 12, you get a new random one, and at 15, you upgrade one of the 4 that you got plus the new one, right? So you will upgrade one of them, right? So that's why the higher grade you are, the better your gear is, because you're losing quote-unquote a roll value. Whereas at level 9 on blue gear, you're getting a new substat. At level 9 on purple gear, you're increasing one of the substats, right? So that's why the grade does matter a little bit in terms of strength. Purple gear is going to be really good gear. It is usually used as placeholder gear, or in some cases, when it rolls really good, it is going to be used as main pieces. So purple gear is very good, right? What's also nice is that you do have a higher chance to get a desired stat increase over epic gear that we'll talk about in a second. So this will be heroic gear, the purple gear, and then we have epic gear. Epic gear has the potential to be the strongest pieces on your account because it starts with all 4. At 3, 6, 9, 12, and 15, you will get a boost to the substats, which means that you have the highest opportunity for the most stats. The one thing with red gear, though, is that you start with these 4 stats, which means that you have a lower chance to roll what you want. So for that blue piece, for that 3 and 6, we have a 50% chance to roll into speed. Whereas for red, there's 4 different ones. There's only a 25% chance that we'll be rolling into speed. So that is why red gear is typically considered the late game gear. It is hard to get your desired stats with this gear, and it's one of the hardest reasons Epic 7 is because of that, because there's so much RNG associated with it, as well as roll RNG that we'll be discussing in a second. So that part is going to be for the grade. Then there's going to be the level of your gear. So the level is where you actually start seeing some of the really big differences from early game players to late game players. What I can honestly tell y'all is anything below level 75 is something that you are going to outgrow very fast, right? If you have gear that's 75 still works pretty well. This is usually event gear, right? Level 75 is event gear. There are some pieces that are level 71, but as you can see, there's a big difference in terms of substats from a level 71 gear to a level 75 gear because lower gear rolls lower, right? So this is something you will be outpacing extremely fast, right? So the only gears, anything below 75, once you can farm Wyvern 13 and once you get replacement for your gear, this will be hand-me-down gear until it becomes hand-me-down for your hand-me-downs, right? So eventually you will get rid of a majority of your pieces, right? I still keep a couple that are still decent. For this one, for example, the only reason I kept it is because it is actually going to be a very solid piece if I ever need a PvE support hero, right? So things like level 67 that rolled well, you can still keep. It's actually okay to keep some lower level gear as hand-me-downs, but as you go on, you'll start progressing to higher gear because it has higher roll value. As you see, from level 78 is higher than 75, but once we get to level 75, it is essentially going to be the exact to level 78 and 80. It is going to be the exact same as level 85 gear. So level 78 gear is typically what they'll put for a lot of event gear, and for almost all intents and purposes is the exact same as level 85 gear, with the exception that you have lower starting roll values, right? So you can't roll as high, but it's still usually pretty good because event pieces give you very good starting substats, right? Like every substat for this is amazing for a support, right? And then of course there's a level 85 gear. The good thing about level 85 gear versus the other gear is that level 85 gear can be reforged to level 90, and we'll talk about reforging, but essentially what reforging does is it boosts all the stats that you have higher up, making level 85 gear extremely nice, right? And then of course there's level 88 gear, which is going to be your, again, event gear that you cannot reforge, but it does have the highest starting roll value. You will also get this from things like raid and from Abyss, and these pieces tend to be extremely good because not only are you guaranteed to have good substance on them, they also tend to roll better because they're the highest level of gear. So again, typically, as far as how you should be moving forward with your account as you get higher level gear and higher level grade gear, anything below level 75 has to be extremely valuable to your account. it has to be something that you don't have a replacement to, right? So typically you will gear a unit, you'll make it work for your current rank. As you get better gear, as you're farming towards Wyvern, once you farm Wyvern 13, you will slowly change the gear out on your units for better, higher level grade gear. That's why you see my account is primarily going to be level 85 gear, right? And you will get a lot of level 85 gear once you actually start farming the higher stages of Wyvern, the higher stages of all that stuff. But this does not mean all your lower gear is bad. For example, a lot of this gear goes into my, like for rounding up pieces, I don't have a better replacement for this because I just haven't been able to get one, right? So it's still something that you should not just sell the gear or enhance the gear just because you can, just because you don't like it, like you think it's like below you, because you may not find something better. So while you will phase it out, make sure you have a replacement, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth in the next section, which is going to be the enhancing your gear and enhancing your units when you're first starting. So again, different gear, different level. The higher the level, the higher the grade, the better the gear is going to be. Typically, blue gear is more of early game. As you get later in the game, purple gear is what you primarily be looking for. Purple and red gear. Blue gear and lower gear level, lower than level 75, you are going to be phasing out quite quickly. By the time you're like 1 year in, you will have very few pieces, only really event pieces that are below level 65, right? So now let's get a little bit more to the enhancing portion. Alright, now that we know about grade and level, there's another part that a lot of people seem to gloss over, and that is going to be what can you get on the gear on the particular pieces, because there's sword, helmet, chest, neck, ring, and boots. Well, when we actually look at these, there are some special exceptions that you can get and some certain main stats that you can't get on other equipments. For swords, you will always have an attack main stat. This will always be the case for swords, which is really nice because it drops some of the RNG. Another thing is that you can never roll defense or defense percentage on a sword piece. That is very important that you know that, because if you're trying to get defense, you will never get defense. I can show you every sword on this planet and you will never see a defense or defense percentage substat. And that is something that you should know, because if you don't know, then you're going to be like, what the heck, right? I wanted this stat. For helmets, they do not have the subset restriction, but they will always be health percentage. You can get all stats on here: defense flat, defense percentage, health flat, health percentage, and all of that good stuff. So they can get everything, but they will always be health percentage main. For the chest, this is another one that's going to be special. It will always have defense as the main, but you will never get attack percentage or flat attack on a chest. No matter what chest you look at, you will never get attack or attack percentage. Don't look for it. You're never going to get it, right? So typically that is why for swords and chest, they're the best times to get a lot of offensive stats, because you're not going to be able to get it. You're not going to be able to get defense, so you don't have to waste a subset on defense. You want to get the most offensive stats here, right? For chest, you typically want to get the most defensive stats or the most speed or whatever you need, or crit damage depending on what you need, since you can't get attack, right? So you want to maximize attack on the sword, and you want to maximize speed or crit damage or whatever else on the chest, particularly crit damage for DPSs, right? But for supports, it more be of the defensive stat, because you can't get attack here. Then we're going to be going to the boot, ring, and necklace. So for the boot, ring, and necklace, let's start with the necklace. One thing to note is that the main stat can vary for the necks, right? The neck is the only place you can have a crit damage main. But one thing to note is you will never have a matching main stat and a matching substat. This is something that I see a lot of posts, people being like, why is there no attack percentage on this piece? Why can't I get this, right? You will never, ever get attack percentage main and attack percentage sub, right? Or likewise for any stat, right? HP, defense, you cannot get that on the other pieces. This holds true as well for the helmets, swords, and chest. You will never get flat defense on a chest. You will never get flat HP on a helmet. You will never get flat attack on a sword, right? That is just how it goes, because the main stat, you can't get a substat of the same thing as the main stat. As far as necklaces, they can get all the main stats. They can get percentage, they can get flat, they can get a lot of different stats. The stats they can't get is going to be speed, effect resistance for the main stat, right? For the substats, they can get everything. But for the main stat, they can't get speed, they can't get effectiveness, they can get effect rest, and they can get that's pretty much it: speed, effectiveness, and effect rest. But they can get critical hit damage, and they can get critical hit rate, right? As far as the rings, Again, you can get all the different stats on the ring, but you cannot get critical hit damage. You cannot get critical hit rate for the main stat, but you can get it on the substat, right? But not for the main stat, and you cannot get speed. And for the boots, you can get everything, but no crit rate and no crit damage and no effectiveness or FRES. Rings, you can get effectiveness and you can get FRES, right? So again, small nuance stuff. So just to summarize, next, the unique stat to them is crit damage and crit rate for the main. For rings, it is effectiveness and FRES, and for boosts, it is speed, right? So that's like their exclusive, but they can get all the other main stats, right? One thing that a lot of people wonder is, should I get percentage or flat on the main? So for the main one, it is almost always going to be good to get percentage. Flat is not as good unless it's speed, right? Flat speed, of course, is the best one. But for the main stat, usually percentage is the best just because of reforging, right? This doesn't mean that all rings that are flat are trash. You can get a flat piece that is really good, that has really good substats, even though it may not be a percentage stat, right? But typically percentage is going to be good. For next, again, if it's a DPS, crit rate or crit damage. If it's a bruiser, crit rate is actually recommended because critical hit rate for bruisers is a lot better. We'll talk about this a lot more later on in the video because I don't want to confuse you guys with more details before we talk about a lot more of the basics of gearing. So with that, let's move on to the next section. Alright, so now the next basic thing that you will be doing a lot is going to be enhancing your gear and kind of looking for substat rolls. We're going to do it with this blue piece because it's a lot easier to level up and because it'll be easier for us to track the substat changes. So I will also be telling you guys where to find these charms that a lot of people have problems getting charms. There is a lot of places you can actually get charms that can help you progress your account. Make sure you're doing this weekly and daily because if you're not, you're going to be falling up behind on your gearing, right? So as far as enhancing, again, we mentioned 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, you will get new substats and you'll get different things. One thing to note is you can actually feed gear that, for example, we talked about that placeholder gear, right? We talked about that lower level gear. It's not wasted. Let's say this helmet, I never find a replacement for it, and it's a gear that I've been thinking about getting rid of, right? Well, you see that it's plus 15, and you'll be thinking, doesn't that mean that you wasted those precious charms? Not really, because you can actually use this gear to enhance your gear that you currently have. Right, you see that it basically transfers a lot of it. It's not 100%. It's a little bit, it's around like 70-60%, maybe a little bit less, but it's pretty good, right? It's a really good conversion. It's not wasted, right? This is not wasted. So don't feel bad if you're just starting the game and you want to enhance your low level pieces. It's okay. Just use it later on to feed your better pieces once you get replacements, right? And then as you can see, yes, it has to be enhanced, right? But you can also use gear that you don't like as far as enhancement. For example, for that fodder gear that you get in Arena, that's how you would use for enhancing. So that's one of the ways you can get a lot of enhancement, and you can slowly phase out your gear, right? So once you get rid, for example, for me, this piece doesn't really help me because I have way better pieces in my account, allegedly, right? I probably don't, but that's why I haven't sold it. But let's say I did, I could easily use this as an enhancement, and I don't waste all those charms that I used on this piece because I get to convert it directly to my new piece, my new and better and improved piece, right? I'd only recommend doing this for low-level gear, something that's below 75 or that's blue gear, because you always will want to keep your spare gear, right? You see all these different pieces. I never sold them because while they may not work for my main units, there might be a unit that I'm trying to test out where it will work really good in. But now as far as the rolling, it's pretty basic. You can use the charms, the different level charms, and you'll enhance it. And once you get to 3, 6, you'll get one of the substats. As you see there, you get a roll value. We will be talking about the roll values in a very close second, right after I show you guys where you can get your enhancing materials, right? So that is going to be as far as like starting the enhancing process. It's very easy. You just have to feed charms. That there's a lot of places you can get it. You can get it from Adventure, and I'll just show you guys. But then also for old gear that you don't use anymore, or gear that you didn't like how I roll, you can also use it. One tip I do want to give you is if, for example, you're trying to chase a certain substat, right? So let's say right here, I really want speed, or I really want attack. Let's say I don't really want speed for this piece. What I can do is I can put 1 or 2 charms, right? One at a time. Maybe I'll get a greater, right? So that's what we do, 1 at a time. So we get a greater, so we got a little bit more. One thing you can do is when you do this, what you want to be watching for is if you really want to attack, you want to do it slowly because, okay, we got attack. That means we can go a little bit more charms, right? But if I didn't want to attack, let's say I wanted to enhance a different piece and I just wanted speed, I should stop right here. If I just wanted speed and this is, let's say this is FRES and I don't need it on anyone, then I stop right there. Don't waste your charms, right? Don't waste your charms on gear that's not going to be good for you. So make sure you slowly work your way up enhancing so you know what subsets you want. You can control it. You can better see what you're actually doing. So now let me show you guys where you can get those enhancing materials. So for some places you can get those enhancing materials, as we mentioned, that fodder gear that you get from Adventure is a good place. The other place that you should be doing every single week is going to be here, where you can get the epic equipment, accessory. You get quite a lot of charms here, which is really, really nice that they have done this. But there's also somewhere that a lot of people may not know that you can actually go to, and that is going to be in the labyrinth, and this resets on a daily. If you go to somewhere like Tyra Castle, and this is the place I recommend, you go here to Area 1, I'm just going to click through these quite quickly because I've been here a million times to get enhancement gear. Once you actually clear this and you're able to, like, you should clear this one just because you need this chop, right? And you'll probably want to, because if you like the storyline, which honestly one of the best parts of the game, you'll want to do this. But essentially, you'll come here, you'll go to Hoochie, you'll go to the top right? You'll have to fight one wave in this labyrinth, which we should be able to very easily. Just my Ross will just S3, he'll get rid of the wave. And you can do this every single day as well, by the way. So you can get a lot of charms this way. It starts stacking up if you really do want to upgrade your gear. And that's something that I know a lot of players do want to do. You can do this. It does cost gold, though. You'll come here to Hoochie. And Hoochie will have charms for you, right? So we can buy the charms. And you can do this every single day, right? And we get some really good charms, right? And there's another place where if you're feeling a little bit more wealthy, right? If you have a little bit more gold and let's say you have a lot more gold, and you don't really know what to do with your gold and you want charms, well, one place you can also visit is going to be in the adventure story mode in episode 3, in chapter 1, episode 1, chapter 3. I think that's how they do this one. They do the chapters kind of weird, but essentially you'll go here to Britannia into part 3. You'll go here, you go to Karubaran, and there you'll find the Goblin Merchant. Now the thing about the Goblin Merchant is that compared to Hoochie, these artifact charms are very expensive, right? Like, they are not cheap. So only come here if you have an excess of gold, because otherwise you are not going to get a lot out of this, right? You're going to be wasting a lot of gold, and you may need it for other things, right? But if you do have a surplus of gold and you're just trying to enhance, you can also get charms from him. Again, we see that it's a lot more expensive than Hoochie. Hoochie was selling us these for like a third of the price, right? And of course, this gear is useless. Never look at it. You can't even buy it. But yeah, that's going to be where you can find the enhancement materials for the basic places, as well as just running adventure and using your pet. Pet guide will be in the future. If this video gets enough likes and enough comments that they want a pet guide, if you found this section helpful, make sure to leave a comment saying pet guide, please. But with that, let's move on to the next topic, which is going to be reforging gear as well as substat changes. The next part of gearing, after we know enhancing and all that good stuff, is going to be roll value. Now, roll value is something that is going to be a critical part to understanding if your gear is good or not. This is probably, if you don't get anything from this video, this little chart is the one thing you need to keep in mind. I do have this in the Discord and the help channel, as well as pinned in general, so you can have easy access to it. But this is going to be the biggest part for understanding gear. We talked about the stats that you can get, and this basically summarizes it for you. But the other part that this is going to go over is going to be the substats, right? And that's the one that's going to be the big one, as well as the main stat. As we talked about, this is just for review, so you guys can get some review. For the main stat, the lower the level, as you see here, the different levels, you get lower max stat that you can get. This is the reason why once you get to level 72 gear or lower, it's not as good, because you're not getting as much on the main stats, right? So that's why you typically do want to get higher level gear and higher grade gear. And just kind of goes over all that stuff that we talked about. We talked about that. We also talked about what you can get on each of them, right? That on necks you can get crit rate, crit damage. On rings you can get effectiveness, FRES. And on boots you can get speed, as well as the other ones. They don't show flab because typically you shouldn't be using those, as we talked about before. But the important one is going to be the substat portion, right? So there's something called min rolls and max rolls. This portion we're going to be focusing on is going to be this portion right here, because level 85 gear is what you're mostly going to be working with, right? Before we talk about reforging and all that stuff. So the biggest thing with this section is going to be that your gear has a starting substats. Those substats that you get in the game have a starting value, and every time you roll at 3, 6, 9, 12, or 15, you get a substat boost of a certain amount that is random. This random factor is between this certain range. So for attack percentage, effectiveness, and resistance percentages, you can get up to 8% on level 85 gear, or as low as 4%. That is a massive gap, right? Because if you get 2 rolls onto your attack percentage, you can get up to 16% or 8%, right? So this is going to be huge when we talk about what gear is good and when you know to keep rolling on a gear and when you should throw a gear away. This is the biggest thing, because if you have a piece of gear that low rolls consistently, that is most likely going to be a fodder piece or a piece that's just going to be a placeholder, right? Because when you have this, +8 is the best you can get. 7 is still really good and all that good stuff. Same thing for the other stats. Critical hit rate is 3 to 5. This one's probably the most forgiving of all of them because it's such a small range. Even if you low roll, is not that big of a deal as long as you can still get 100% crit rate. So it's not the worst thing on the planet to get a low roll crit. Yes, it sucks, but it's not as bad. Critical hit damage, again, we see 3 to 8. Critical hit damage can really low roll and really mess up your day, right? And then, of course, speed, 1 through 5. You will never get 5. It's very rare to get 5 on speed, but it is possible. 4 is the most likely. But yes, you can have a penta roll speed piece that is only 9 speed. So, yes, it sucks. Low rolls suck, but it's one of the most annoying points, but something you need to understand. Whenever you roll on a piece, you'll be able to getting a high roll, a mid roll, which is somewhere in between, or a max roll. If you get pieces with max roll or pieces that start with these stats, right? So if you get a new piece of gear that has 8% health, 8% attack, and like 5% crit, that is a very good piece because you have a max starting roll value, right? And that is going to be very, very good, right? So that's going to be a huge thing that you need to understand because that is going to be the way that you know if your gear is good or not. And we're going to talk about this a lot more, but that is going to be the roll process, right? So when you enhance, you get these rolls. These are the values you can get. So when we rolled that blue piece, we only got 5% attack, which was a low roll, right? So that piece is not as good as it could be, right? If that had been a high roll, we would have had like 13 attack, or we had a double attack roll, we would have been at 20% attack, right? So that sucks, right? Because it's a lot weaker than it could have been. But again, it's still a placeholder gear. So just know that you can get high rolls or low rolls. So with that, let's start talking about reforges, because reforges, again, kind of goes off this, right? So let's get into reforges. All right. Time for reforging. Now, reforging is not too complicated to understand, but essentially what you're doing is getting one of your level 85 pieces to get stronger. This is the reason why farming Hunt 13 is so important, because you get a lot more of these materials, as well as exploration, because that's where you get them, as well as getting the gear that you can actually reforge. You can also get it through conversion that we'll talk about in gear acquisition section. But with this, let's kind of look at some of the gear that you can reforge. Again, it is only going to be level 85 gear, and it depends on what set it is. You can also get pieces from World Boss that you can actually reforge. If it's level 85 gear, and it'll probably tell you if it's a Wyvern piece, right? If it's a speed set piece, it'll probably be considered a Wyvern piece because it's speed set. So you will need this to reforge it, right? So it goes according to what the hunts have. So what it does, again, level 85 gear, once you get a gear piece to plus 15, you'll be able to enhance the roll values. So if you roll into it, you will get more of a boost, right? So for example, for this piece, we did not roll into speed a single time, so we did not get a boost on our speed, right? But we did get boost on the other stats that we did roll into, and the more it rolls, the higher the roll value is. So for example, for the attack, we rolled into attack 2 times, so that's what you see. We get a 4% boost, and that is set, right? Depending on the amount of times, you get a certain amount. If you roll into attack or health 2 times, you get a 4% boost. If you roll into it 1 time, like we did with health, we only roll into it 1 time, you will get a 3% boost, right? So it does vary according to the stat, but it is going to be pretty much set for that substat depending on how many times you rolled on that particular substat, right? So that is already set, right? So some will roll more, some will roll less, and I don't have the quite information. It's very close, but overall it's a big stat boost. The only one that I really know, because it's the one that you'll keep track of a lot, is going to be speed, right? Because speed, if you roll into it once, you get 1 more speed. If you roll into it twice, you get 2. If you roll 3, you get 3 speed, and so forth and so forth. Again, similar idea with these other substats. This one was 1 time into speed, 1 time into effectiveness, which is why we get 3%, 2 times into crit rate, which is why we are getting 4%, which is pretty nice, and then of course 1 time into health, right? So that kind of should give you an idea on how much, like, overall, the only thing you really need to know about this is that you're boosting the stats up by a certain level, right? And it is very important because it will make your gear that much better. These are set. It doesn't matter if it was low roll or high roll, as we talked about, that you can get those high rolls or low rolls. It just depends how many times you rolled into the stat that you will get the boost. So it makes your good gear even better, right? As far as to where you can get the materials for this, the big places and why you should really be farming these places are going to be things like Expedition. So when you come to somewhere like Expedition, that's where you're going to be getting this in this Expedition Depot, which is why you want to have your teams as soon as possible. It is okay to do level 1s. Even if you're a late game player, like for me, if I really wanted these this month, I should put this, I should embark, I should put a level 1, and I should try to clear this myself, right? And you should be able to clear it. It's very low energy to actually enter yourself. So if you really want these rewards, you can actually solo clear the level 1s once you get a little bit stronger, right? And it is very important that you do this every month because this is how you are getting the most reforges possible. Right, this is how you're getting those reforged pieces. It is kind of sad that we don't have fire right now, but that's how you would get it. The other place that you would really get it is the new advent side story. For that, you have to get better gear to be farming, but you do get a couple from the rewards if you're able to clear it. But the main place you're going to be getting it is when you're just naturally farming for your gear, which is going to be in the wyvern stage, right? You'll get a lot. The thing about it is at 11, you do start getting these pieces, right? You start getting quite a few. The thing about it is you don't have a chance to get the 50 drop, which is the main way you're going to be boosting those numbers, right? The 50 drop, you have the highest chance to get it at 13, as well as just naturally getting more than the other level, than getting the hunt 11, right? That's why even hunt stage 12, you have a very low chance of getting that plus 50, as well as not getting the best gear possible, which is why you want to clear 13 as fast as possible, because you get more reforged materials, you get higher level great gear, which means that you're going to be happier, you're going to get more gear, you're going to get better at the game, right? So it's very important that you do this as soon as possible, both for the reforged materials as well as for the gear itself. But with that, let's talk about reforging, not reforging, substat changing, which is another thing that you can get on expeditions. All right, so now for those modification pieces, this is something that's very new to the game, and it's something that you need to be careful about. These stones you will be getting from the expeditions when you clear the expeditions, as well as from the advent side story, which is again another new game mode, right? But what you can do is modify substats that you don't like. For example, this piece is going to be a raid sword that you can get from the labyrinth. And it has some really good substats, but the health is a little weird for my Operator Sigurd, right? My Operator Sigurd is not a unit that needs this health. So what I can do is with these substats is I can look here and I can get some critical hit damage, right? And the higher the grade of the stone, the higher the substat change will be. If it was a purple piece, you can get all the way up to 8%, right? So of course you want to have these purple pieces because they are just significantly better than these trash pieces, right? So you do want the purple ones, but you can change the substat. I can change this health for critical hit damage, right? This health does nothing for me, right? And I can change it for something that does something for me. Now, the thing to note for this system, while it is very good at fixing good gear, it is not good at fixing gear that rolled away you didn't want it. So, for example, let's say this was going on a bruiser, right? Like an Alencia. And I wanted to change the attack for some reason to critical hit damage, right? If you see here, if I try to change this attack, it rolled 2 times into attack. 2 full rolls went into attack, which means that if we're assuming by the roll ratio, the starting attack is 8% plus the 16% I could have potentially gotten, that I could have gotten up to what? 24% crit damage, right? The same as I had the attack, which is a high roll. But if I modify it, I lose a ton of roll value. As you see there, I lose over 50% of my roll value. Whereas if I go for a substat that I never rolled into, I never roll into health, right? This is a base value health. I can use this stone and essentially lose nothing. Only like 50%, right? Maximum. And if we get these greater stones, I legitimately lose almost nothing, right? Literally almost nothing, right? If we put something like effectiveness, this will also showcase it. Here, it never rolled into health. We get up to 8%. That is amazing. That means that I'm losing almost no roll value. But if we go to this part where we got a lot of rolls into this, we are losing upwards of 50% of the stat because we could have gotten 24% effectiveness if it was just a natural roll. This is very significant because this means you can only slightly adjust the substats, right? What this means is that you should not be using these on pieces that you rolled something multiple times. So for example, for this crit rate, again, I only rolled into it once. And I'm only losing, realistically, like what? 5%? Yeah, it's not that great, but it's still better than the higher up, right? So the more you roll on a substat, the worse these stones become. So it cannot fix your bad gear. And that is important to know. It can only make your good gear better. So for example, this piece is amazing, and I can make it even better from my operator cigarette because it didn't roll into here. And I typically will not, you can use it on things that you rolled once, and I do that occasionally, but you should not do this on like very high rolls. Like if this was FRS, that piece is just, you have to accept it. It's FRS. You can't do anything about it, right? That's just what it is. You cannot change that substat. And that is a part that makes modification very frustrating for a lot of players, because there are people that have pieces that have things that they don't really want. But again, for pieces like this one, again, I don't need this health. That could be crit damage. I could be doing more damage from the operator cigarette. I can go in, modify that, lose almost no roll value, right? Because I didn't roll into it. So again, modification is a way to get your gear to become better. And you can get that from Expedition and the admin side story. But now let's move on to the next section. At this point in the video, we've talked a lot on what you can do with your gear. We've talked about how to enhance it, how to transfer it, how to do reforging, right? A lot of these concepts. But at the end of the day, how are you getting your gear? This one is going to be something that it's kind of basic, but it's something that, you know, you have to remember. So some places you can get it is going to be places like World Boss, right? So World Boss will occasionally drop some really good pieces. Some of my best pieces are from World Boss, and it does drop level 85 pieces, which means you can actually reforge them, right? So World Boss just drop some pretty nice stuff occasionally, right? The other place that sometimes when you're re-rolling for bookmarks, you can't actually get from the shop. These are some of like the more like niche ways to get it. The other place where you're going to be getting some of your best swords and chest is going to be actually from raid, from the hard raid, which is why you should be doing the hard raid every single time. Thus, these are the pieces that you can get that are usually extremely strong, right? Usually some of the best pieces on like the best chest and the best swords come from here, because as we can see here, they're level 88 and they usually are amazing substats, right? So if it's for the unit that you want, it is very good. And you can change this crit rate into, if you don't want the crit rate, if it doesn't roll into crit rate, you can use one of those modification stones and get something like HP or defense flat, right? So that part is going to be very nice. And again, you also get some of the best swords from here, just because it's so good. It has almost everything you need. And with the new set, the new thing, at worst, it becomes a bruiser sword. At best, it becomes an amazing DPS sword, right? So this is another really good place you should be doing a lot at the time. But the other big place that you're going to be getting gear on is going to be from the hunts and gear conversion, right? So from hunt, you get a lot of level 85 pieces, right? So let's say I'm going to hunt and I'm doing my little thing and I'm farming my wyvern. You're getting the gear, right? But let's say you're not getting what you want, right? What you can do is you can go over here, and for the gear that you don't want, you can actually take it off. And I'll actually show it in the crafting section, because that's another place you get the gear. As you get materials, pretty like from wyvern, you can come over here, you can go to the place, and you can craft some of the gear, right? So you can go to crafting, and you can craft for yourself a little bit of gear, right? You can craft some nice little gear. So for example, let's say I have a lot of banshee materials, and I've been looking for a nice ring, right? You can craft here, and you can get some of the stuff, right? But let's say 4 rings in particular, this time we didn't get anything epic, which stinks a little bit, but there's sometimes things you can get, right? So first, for me personally, I don't use blue pieces anymore. If you're an early game player, you should not be doing what I'm doing right now. I know this is really bad because I'm literally doing this in front of you, but it's really good for me, it doesn't mean anything, so I don't even look at it. The thing that is nice though is if you see, it comes from a set, and if you extract it, you will get a certain piece from your extraction, right? You will get something from it. So for this one, let's say I really wanted an Everest ring. While this is a really nice Everest ring, maybe I don't like effectiveness, right? I don't think that's something that I want on a ring, right? But I do like the set. What you can do is extract it, and you'll get some extraction materials that you'll be able to use later on. So from this extraction materials, you'll be able to use other stuff. So for this one, this piece, it's honestly not a bad piece, right? It has speed and defense, and the attacker can reforge it out if it doesn't roll into it. So I'll actually keep that one because it's in the set I want. For something like this, it's a main stat I know I'll never use, so that's why I'm selling these without really looking at them. It's main stat that I know with the main stat with the set that it comes in, it's something I know I'll never use. So I can easily extract those just in case in the future I do want a destruction ring, right? For a subset that I do want. And of course, these two pieces I will likely keep because I think they have potential, right? I think they're okay pieces, right? They're decent. So I'm not going to sell them because they could be helpful to me, right? But what you can do with the gear that you don't want is come over here to this little place in the Alchemist Steeple and equipment convert it. So if we go back to the rings, we have these stones. The way you get these stones is primarily going to be from your guild, from the shop. In the guild shop, you can get these stones as well as from the transit stone shop. That's another really good way to get them, from some transit stone, from events, from tower. There's a lot of places to get these, and eventually you'll get a lot. But let's say, for example, let's go back to my FRES piece, right? Let's say I really want that amazing FRES piece that we had, right? And then we didn't get any. So now what I can do is come here, I can get the stones that I got. It takes quite a few to actually get it, so you will have to craft quite a bit of times, and then we can try to get a guaranteed main stat, and if we put all of them, we're guaranteed epic grade, and if we look, I can maybe get something that's good. So for this one, it's honestly kind of fodder. So I'll probably be selling this one. You can extract it and you'll get some of the materials back, or if you think you're like, man, I just really need to fill this piece in, you can keep it. For me, this is useless because I have better rings, so I don't need this in particular. I don't need it to round out a unit, so I can personally sell it. But for you, you may want to keep it, right? Because it does have two really good substats that can be used. So me personally, I'll extract it. For you, that could be different. So that is going to be how you approach these type of things, right? So that is going to be for how you get the gear. That's the main ways you get it, and some of the logic that I go behind. For me, I almost always sell blue gear. And I look for main set matching stat, right? And I try to think of heroes that can use that. But with that, now that we know how gear acquisition and we talked a little bit about how to decide what gear was good, let's actually dive deep in what gear should you be keeping. All right, so now let's talk about some more advanced topics, which is going to be what gear should I be keeping? What gear should I be rolling? What's good gear, right? How am I supposed to know? So one thing I want to push is going to be the functional view in what gear to keep and what gear not to keep. Because the biggest mistake, as I said in the beginning, is people thinking that all these pieces are trash because they don't have speed, right? Or they think it's bad because it's not epic gear, perfect sub rule. No, right? There's things that you actually need to watch out for. So first off, the first thing you want to do is match main set to, and let's actually look at ones that is not enhanced leveled up for me, right? So let's look at things that are not enhanced for me. So that way we can actually have a discussion on each of the pieces and you get some practice by realizing. The first thing I do is I check the set and I check the substats, right? So for example, let's see this piece. This piece is a critical hit damage set. I got heroic, so that's fine. That's the first thing I check is the set and the grade. It's heroic, that's fine. It's not epic, but it still could be really good. It's a crit damage set. Okay, crit damage set usually goes on units like DPSs, right? There are very few units that are not DPSs that are going to use this. Maybe there is a knight that I may use in the future, like a Lilius, right? So I think of units, right? That's the next thing I do. I think of set, then I think of units. You know, crit damage set could be good on Lilius, right? So maybe if it has HP, it's not that big of a deal. The next thing I'll do is look at the substats. Does the substat match what I want it to do? Or at least two substats. We get critical hit damage, we get speed, and we get attack. That is things that I would want a DPS to have. I want them to have a crit damage, I want them to have attack, and I want them to have speed, right? But let's say for some reason I didn't want speed, but I had the crit damage and attack, I would still keep this piece, right? So already from what we saw, it's something I would keep because it has everything I would want, right? Then the next part that I will look at, I try to decide, okay, the substats look good, or two of the substats look good, at least two, right? And when you roll it to plus 12, maybe you'll get another one that's not so great, but if it rolls on to crit damage, then it's still a good piece, right? Like, if you have two substats that you want, you should keep that piece. So for this, it has more than two, right? So we'll look at another piece, but this piece is one that I would definitely keep. It matches the set. It matches what I wanted to do. And the last part is it has good starting roll value, right? Because we know critical hit damage is 8% max. Attack percentage, 8% max. That's not too far off. And speed is 4 max. That's not bad, right? That's pretty close to high roll, right? That's pretty solid. That's a good piece. I'm going to keep it. For sure, I'm keeping this piece, right? Until I decide to have a unit that I want to roll it on, right? So let's look at something a little bit different. Let's look at this counter piece that's a little bit more quirky, right? Because it's counter set, right? So let first set, right? What is it? counter set who can use this? Bruisers, typically, right? Most of the time, it's a bruiser that is going to be using this piece, for the most part. Now, the next part is to look at the substats that I got. Well, I got attack percentage, crit rate, and crit hit damage, right? Those are pretty aggressive stats, but I like the crit rate and the critical hit damage. The attack, not so much, because let's say I really want this on, I don't know, an Alencia, right? Well, that's the part that you also have to realize that other units can use this. Now I can start thinking, I've been thinking about building a counter, I don't know, Moonlight Araminthia. Maybe the attack is not that bad, right? But again, it's usually on boosters. So I already see crit rate, crit hit chance, and crit hit damage. Attack is not the best, right? So I'm not happy about it. But I have 2 subsets that I want, so I'm going to keep it. Because then I look at the roll value. It's not high roll, it's mid roll. It's okay, right? I'll probably have to find something better, but I may not be able to, right? So again, if we can do this over and over for gear pieces. Look at something. Let's start looking at the more complicated ones, things like rings. Let's look at this ring, right? That I actually have kept, despite everything that tells me potentially to sell this, right? Why have I kept this? Well, first, let's look at the set, right? It is crit rate set. I typically think, well, that needs to be a bruiser that is immune, or I can support, or a DPS, right? That's the 2 units that I can think of that could potentially use the crit ring, right? And then we look at the main set, attack percentage, right? So I am forced this, okay, it can no longer really go on a bruiser because it's attack percentage, unless I am willing to look up for health percentage. So, all right, so let's think some units. Let's see, maybe I want this on Ken or Violet, maybe Violet, right? Let's think Violet. Well, we have speed, it's low rolled, it's not great. Crit hit chance is a high roll though. Health is okay. And then we have the dreaded F-Rest that everyone hates because they're like, oh, it has F-Rest, trash gear. No, because there's a chance when I roll this, it's not going to go into F-Rest, right? So what I can do, when I come in here, I'm like, okay, this piece looks hopeful, right? Let me see how it rolls a little bit. The substats are a little bit wonky, but let me see how it rolls, right? So let me roll 1 charm only. And we see we got crit hit chance. We got a max roll on crit. And we got some health. So now I can start thinking, do I want to stop and sell this gear or transmit it or feed it into another piece? Or do I want to keep rolling it, right? And that's what you want to do. Well, now for this piece, it got crit rate and it was a max roll, which is cool. And it got quite a lot of flat HP. To me, this piece is still good. I could still use this on something like my Mort, right? And I have to think functionally. This could go on Mort, right? Why should I throw this away now? It has great crit rate. It has solid HP. That attack, it's a little weird on Mort, but hey, maybe I can get some damage up there because he can scale a little bit with attack. Or maybe this can go on something like Ravi now. Ravi could potentially use this. I can get some other stats somewhere else. Ravi struggles with crit rate, right? So it's something I could use on her. And the F-Res, I can just reforge it out later. So then I would be like, okay, let me continue a little bit more and see if it's trash or not. Then it rolled into F-Res. At this point, I'm like, okay, it's a little bit harder for me to roll it, so I'm not going to stop it. I already invested a lot of charms in it, so what I would do most likely is feed this piece into another piece or use it as a placeholder. So for me, this piece most likely will become a fodder gear. Right? So when I'm enhancing something else, I'll probably use this as fodder. I will probably keep it as a placeholder. If you're a new player, I'll probably keep it as a placeholder. But that's a process you want to look for. So again, to summarize this exercise, the first thing you want to do is look at the set, look at the subsets. Does it match something you want functionally, right? Is it something you want to use this on, right? And you have to think deep because there are some very cool units that have really good things. The next thing is the roll value. There are pieces that I've kept just because the roll value is absolutely just like ridiculous, right? For example, this piece. I have kept this piece even though I functionally cannot think of a unit just because of the fact that the substats are ridiculous on this, right? It high rolled all across the board. So maybe one day they'll release a really good unit that can use this piece. So I'm going to keep it because that's amazing high rolls, right? Like ridiculously good high rolls. Or at worst, it can be an off piece, right? So again, there's a lot to deciding what gear you want, but that's how I would approach deciding what gear you want to keep. Is the set, do you have it? And the biggest question you need to ask yourself, do I have a replacement for it? And that is a question that you really have to consider because a lot of the times the answer is going to be no, right? So if I look at something like my Operator Sigrid, I know we keep putting her on here, but that is usually one of the reasons. Operator Sigrid, she still has this blue piece. Why? It's not good. I don't have anything better. And that's really just what it comes down to. I have nothing better. So this ring is stuck on Operator Sigrid. And then, of course, one day I will get a better ring. So what should I do with this piece? Throw it out? No, it still has good substats. So what am I going to do with this? Well, that's going to go on my Luluka. Granted, my Luluka already has a good set, and it's going to be a leftover piece, right? So that will go on my Luluka as a leftover piece, right? So that's how Luluka was made. And I do use Luluka a lot for PvE. These were all pieces that I did not like, right? That I kept because I didn't have a better piece, and then I got a better piece, and then I put it on her, right? So like this one's actually a really good piece, but there's some other pieces here that I'm like, like this was like a placeholder. It was a speed sit boot that I had on one of my DPSs because I had nothing better, and then I got something better, and the leftovers went to my PvE Luluka, right? So that's typically how you want to grow your gear out and how you decide what gear to keep, what gear to throw away. Is it something that's functional? Keep it. If it's, you'll use it eventually for testing units, right? So I know this section was a little bit longer. Hopefully it helped you guys get an idea. But just to summarize, again, just look at the set, look at the substats, look at the roll value. Think, do I have anything better, right? Is there something that is better than this, right? And then if it is, you can just give it to one of your other units, right? If it's already plus 15, if you have nothing better, which I sometimes don't. So that is going to be how I decide what gear I want to keep. I look at it, I look at the value, I look if I want it, I'll replace it on one of my units, and then the replacement unit will go to someone else, or it will get foddered if I don't need it anymore. And that's how you should approach what gear to keep. All right, so now let's approach on how to gear your units and how to decide the pieces that should go on different of your units. So the first thing you want to understand is you have to understand the role your unit plays in your team and the role that your unit plays in the game, as well as your gear quality, right? Because that is going to play a big role in what you decide to do. So to kind of get a better idea, we're going to use examples again. We're going to use different units that I have in my account. But again, think first how you want to use this unit, what's their role, right? So for example, let's first think the role aspect of it. Let's think of someone like Violet. He is a bruiser. Right, and when I think about him, I'm like, okay, he needs lifesteal, right? Because I know he needs lifesteal, and we'll talk about that in a second. But if he needs lifesteal, okay, I know he needs lifesteal. I know he needs to be tanky. He doesn't need speed, so I know I'm looking for pieces that don't particularly have speed, right? If you see, most of these pieces don't have speed, right? And to make up for it, I gave him a speed main. But these had the different substats that are really good. The other thing is like, okay, I want him to get at least 85% crit. That's a functional requirement because I know his S2 is going to give him 15% crit rate, right? So I want to get him as close as possible to 85% at least, right? So that's why I gave him a crit set, and I'm like, okay, do I really need immunity set? Not really, because for the most part, he can just dodge, right? Just dodge, and then I'm chilling, right? So then again, that's why I didn't put immunity, but I put crit rate set. And again, this is really good pieces, but a lot of people wouldn't particularly know right away to keep these type of pieces, right? When you look at this crit main, you may at first think it doesn't have speed, it's not a DPS piece, it's trash. But what you have to realize is units like Violet can use this piece, right? Units like Mort can use this piece, right? So you don't want to throw away these type of pieces. Again, look at the set, look at the gear, and think, who can use this piece? And then go from there, right? So for this piece, I had this piece in my account for ages on no one. And Violet got his buff, I was like, man, let me slap that on real quick. And it worked perfectly, right? It works great for him. It's like honestly like a made piece for him almost. So that's why that piece is on him, right? So that's what you want to think functionally, right? Then let's look at something like Operator Sigrid, right? And everyone thinks it's always about speed. And yes, while my Operator Sigrid is pretty fast at 252, I know a lot of players can get this. I only use her for arena. I don't use her for RTA. In RTA, she's too slow, and I understand that. I accepted that. I accept that I can't outspeed players in RTA with this speed. I know that as a player, and that's why you will almost never see me cleave in RTA, because I know I don't have the best speed gear. I know if they put a unit that can outspeed me, I'm screwed. I lose. If they put an F10, I just lost, right? But in Arena, where I'm using Operator Sigrid, this is fast enough to outspeed almost every single defense on this planet, because most defenses in Arena are slow. Same thing with Guild Wars. They're typically around like 200 less. I could honestly make this Operator Sigrid 240 speed and more damage, and she would functionally be the exact same. The only reason I don't is in case they have a speed RB. That is the only reason I don't have her a little bit slower for Arena. It's legitimately just that reason, right? But functionally, that's what she's there for, right? Just for Arena. I thought about it, I looked at it, and then I was like, okay, that's what I need, right? I don't need her to be faster than this, right? And that's why I don't have the best ring on her, because I only use her as a setup as well, right? She doesn't have to one-shot with S2. I'm not relying on her to one-shot with S2. If I was, I would have to give her better gear, but I'm not. I'm just relying on her to do some good poke damage for my Arbiter Builder to finish the cleave, which is why this blue piece is fine. And now let's look at someone like my DN, my PvE unit. DN just needs to have decent speed, decent FRES, and she's good to go. She doesn't have to have some godly gear. So when I'm looking at gear like this helmet's trash, and it rolled trash, right? But it has all the substats I want. It has health, it has defense, it has FRES, and it has speed. It has everything I could have wanted on a helmet. I don't have another helmet like this. Believe it or not, I don't have another helmet with these 4 substats, right? And the day I get a better one, it's going to go on a different PvE unit, right? So for example, right now, this is not that great of a piece, but it's functionally fine, right? It's okay. It's good. It works for DN, for the DN the way I'm using her. And I do use her in Arena and in Guild Wars occasionally, right? And that's okay, right? And at PvE, I use her all the time. And it's okay to have pieces like this on your units because there's functionally nothing better. And this meets all the stats, right? There's no reason for it. And then one day I'll get a better gear, and then that will go on someone like my Amomo, right? Who right now is ungeared. Well, I can now slap that piece on Amomo. Or I can, if I really don't need it and I already have all my supports built, I can just fodder it, right? But in the future, for example, for DN, for that helmet, if I get a better helmet and it doesn't go on my Ruel because my Ruel takes priority, right? My Ruel I use a lot in PvP, so that's why she has slightly better gear. And she has a way better helmet, right? Still not the best, right? Because of this attack, but it has 2 of the substats I want, and it's functionally a decent helmet. If I get a better helmet for Ruel, this helmet would go on DN, and by proxy, the DN helmet would go onto my Amomo, right? And that's how you want to do gearing, how you face out your gear. And that's why if you look at my units, what you will see is the units I use all the time have amazing gear, and the units I don't have placeholder gear. This is a placeholder piece. This was actually a piece that it worked for her, and I didn't have anyone to put it on, right? Because at some point you get a lot of gear that is really good for other units, right? And then there's units that just naturally get built, right? Like Carrot, I did not farm for Carrot set. Believe it or not, I had these pieces lying around from Holiday Youthing, which is why Holiday Youthing got a downgrade, right? But again, it's like, I did what I told you guys earlier in the video. You look at the substats. You think, who could use this piece, right? Maybe Carrot, maybe Holiday Youthing, right? And then you can go on and go forth and get good pieces that way, right? And then get functional working units that do their job. And again, not everything's about speed, right? It needs to make sense, which is why, for example, my Briar Witch that I'm building, currently working on, right? She has some dedicated pieces, but some of them are also placeholder pieces that I just will need to farm in the future for better or for worse, right? For the most part, she has some decent pieces here and there. Actually, she has really good pieces. Right? So she actually has really good pieces. So she most likely will not be changing a lot of the pieces, right? But she's fast functionally because she has to go before my Atagwin, right? And my Atagwin's right here. As you see, my Briar Witch is faster, will go before, and then my Atagwin can go right after, right? So again, functional approach to units. Not everything has to be about speed. Not every unit needs to be fast, right? So that is it for the functional approach to units. Just think, what do I need to use them in? What gear could they use? Get some placeholder gear, and then move from there. All right. That is going to be all I got for you guys today. I hope this video was informative. I do want to summarize some topics for you. Again, look for substats that are good. Check the gear. You'll be fine. You'll do great. I know it's complicated, but hopefully this video made it a little bit less so. So that's all I got for you guys today, and I will see you next time. Peace.